All right, we're going to look here at I started this outline. Does anybody want an extra one? I do have some. It's the one stapled. It says it's got a list on the back. See. Yeah, I don't think you can hear when I started. All right. The Passion, again, is a Latin term that means frustration, sorrow. And when they talk about Jesus being a man of sorrows, it was basically this last week they're looking at his life. Up until that time, he was energetic, and people loved him, and he accepted everybody. And he did not guilt trip. But he did say, okay, now get your life right. Come follow me. Even the man who had his checklist all done and wanted to make sure he had all the boxes ticked. And Jesus said, oh, you need to just sell everything, give to the poor. He didn't say give it all to the poor. He said give to the poor. And come follow me. And the guy couldn't do it. That was the easiest part, if you think about it. So Jesus was very popular. It was just this last week or so that describe him as a man of sorrows and stuff. But we started last week with him, last-minute instructions to the disciples, and then in the garden where he prayed for strength to complete his mission. And you can see that by comparing the first prayer with the third one. The first one, he is so stressed, he's sweating like he's bleeding. And the disciples, it's nappy time after a big meal like that. They didn't know what was going on. Sit and watch. Couldn't you watch with me for an hour? Watch for what? Third time he comes by. Come on, get up. Let's go. Here comes my betrayer. You see the difference that prayer can make. And Jesus, then, he went to them. Judas had prearranged a signal because it was dark in the garden and probably very crowded. But Jesus had made it possible so his disciples could flee and get away, and that none of the other innocent people could be harmed. Judas knew where to lead the mob because Jesus had made it a habit all that week. Go to the same spot. And then Jesus went to them. Peter made good on his desire to go down fighting, and he cut off a guy's ear. Was he going for the guy's ear? No. He was going for his head. And he ducked. John names him, which most commentators will tell you is a red flag to let you know this guy is a member of one Christian group there, and they know him. That's why they named him. That's why they named Nicodemus. And Zacchaeus, who was up in the tree. Naming the people was a way of saying, if you don't believe me, ask the eyewitnesses. This guy's name was Malchus. And in Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of Christ, in this scene, when Jesus healed the man's ear, that guy backed away and left. He wasn't sticking around for any more. And I've always depicted myself that same way, watching him heal the guy's ear. Okay. They were terrified of him anyway. I mean, he raised the dead. And when he stepped up and said, who you looking for? That's me. They all fell back. And Jesus had to ask him again. All right, now Jesus' rebuke to Peter was for his own safety. Put your swords away and get out. No bloodbath in the garden. And these other people, they followed the lights. Oh, goodness. The hardest thing this past week were the sightseers in town. That are just crawling at the idle speed of their car. Just, come on. And the police had to keep moving them on so the emergency people could get through. Now, that's probably what was happening in the garden here, too. Everybody's coming to follow the fire trucks and see what's going on. And Jesus did not want them harmed. Put the swords away. Go. And we know they had at least two. And the disciples then fled. Now, right here in the middle, on the front side, you have to keep this in mind. There are philosophies out there where Jesus got blindsided and lynched. And God had to set up the church as plan B. I don't know about you, but that's not a very powerful God who has to resort to a plan B. who got thwarted by humans or even Satan. Now, this was planned all along. Jesus made happen everything that happened. He was in complete control the whole time. You read that in the prophecy in Isaiah 53, the most important prophecy in the early church. The Ethiopian eunuch was reading that when Philip heard him and asked him about it, and then took him from that point and finished the story, and the man wanted to be in Christ. So, that was a very important prophecy in which it stated that he was not surprised. He did everything that needed to be done. There were prophecies to be fulfilled that he had to see to the end. And then prophecies that were fulfilled that he had no control over. It's amazing when you look at it. But there were 2 trials, and there were segments to each one of them. First was the Jewish trials. The Jews had to find Jesus guilty of a capital offense. One that was, the penalty was death. They had to get rid of this guy. When you got someone so powerful who could raise dead people who had been dead and rotting in the grave, you got to find some weak link in the chain and get this guy out of here. It's usually resorting to violence and death. So they had to find something he was guilty of that carried a death penalty. He took him first to Annas, Annas. Annas was the real high priest, the oldest son of Aaron was the high priest. There are 2 at this time. But Annas, they took him first to Annas, first of all because he was the real high priest. But I think Annas wanted to get his first cut of the beatings because he was in charge of that extremely lucrative trade of the sacrificial lambs in the temple. And Jesus disrupted it. There are references of 3 Passovers in Jesus' ministry. We only have a recording of him cleaning out the temple once, and yet if you look at the details, they're different. In one, he made a whip out of cords and drove everybody out. Another one, he turned over the tables. He could have done that 3 times. So 3 years in a row, Annas got no money from his business. How do people feel when their money is disrupted? So it's, I think, probably because of the cleansings. And what that did was show Jesus' authority over the high priest. Now his position has been threatened, and his reputation. Because not only was it the sale of the animals, but if you didn't have Hebraic coins, you had to change it. And of course, they charged a fee. So it was, people were defrauded by their own leaders on many different levels. And Jesus just showed that for what it was. So they were embarrassed. And they were angry. Caiaphas, spell it C-A-I-A-P-H-A-S. Caiaphas was the high priest that the Romans put in place. I call him the puppet, the Roman puppet. They allowed the Jews to do their own civil government, but they had to have someone that the Romans trusted in place, listening to make sure there were no plans for insurrection. Caiaphas was the one they planted in the Sanhedrin meetings. The Jews laughed secretly to themselves. You know why? Caiaphas was married to Annas' daughter. So the Romans thought they had their puppet in place, and the Jews were still doing their own thing. And of course, Caiaphas had to have a way to cover it, to keep it from being discovered by the Romans. So all he wanted to do was hurry up and get a quick conviction. Because they have to do this all before any supporters of Jesus even wake up in the morning. This is all done in one night before morning. Then they had the ruling group called, we pronounce it Sanhedrin, but the E is not necessarily long in the Hebrew pronunciation. They called it Sanhedrin. That's the Jewish ruling council. They had 70 members. But in this case, only a selection was invited. So when Judas grabbed the mob to get together, the leaders, waiting for them to arrive with Jesus, went out and selected ones that were on their side so that the trial would lean their way. Now we know there were some in the Sanhedrin that believed in Jesus. One went to Jesus in a clandestine meeting. We know you're from God. No one could do the things you're doing unless God was with him. Nicodemus was a member of the Sanhedrin. I guarantee you he was not invited to this. He probably had no idea. He and Joseph from Arimathea might have been there too. They only knew what was going on after Jesus was dead. And they went out, took the body down. Yeah. John's the only one who mentions that because John was the only one who stuck around. All right. However, they met at Caiaphas's house. So there was security. Anybody else who had found out was coming in and complained couldn't get through. Just like trying to get to my house now with the state police. I had to tell them many times how impressed I was with how they were doing. The same kid that directed me after I left Honda at night was still there the next morning when we tried to get to the high school. So bless your heart. You've been here all night. Yeah. All right. They had false witnesses stand up to accuse him. And they brought up some very ridiculous charges. The reason why they couldn't prove anything is none of them could agree. This reminds me of church camp. When it would get boring in the mess hall, this was out in the state of Maine. I was sent out there to recruit the teen kids to come to college in Michigan. And so I had to play the part of counselor for the week. But they would, at the mess hall in the dinner every day, they would convene a kangaroo court, they called it. They'd bring you up on these charges. They brought me up on charges because I was finished with my meal and I was sitting there. Get your elbows off the table, Doug Allen. And I thought, oh no, I'm in trouble now. Because then whoever was picked as the judge that night would pronounce the sentence, and it was usually running around the mess hall giving everybody a high five. Some kid was brought up on charges of being too tall for his age. Another girl having amazingly blue eyes. That was kangaroo court, and this is what they put Jesus through here. Just reminded kangaroo court. They were so desperate to find a charge against him, and they couldn't even agree to themselves. They were probably arguing and fighting themselves. No, it wasn't. It was a guy with dark hair. No, it was not. Nothing could get done. Jesus' silence was deafening. That's how one commentator puts it. He just stood there and looked at him. And when you're mad at someone and want them punished and they sit there smirking at you, how does that make you feel? I'm going to wipe that smile off his face. Just made it worse. But Jesus was waiting until they got to the real issue. They did everything they could to avoid it. He was silent to the lesser charges, again prophesied in Isaiah 53. The only time he spoke is when it cost him his life. The only time he spoke is when the issue of his deity arose. Spell that D-E-I-T-Y because that's a Latin phrase for God, Deus. When that arose, are you the Christ, the Son of God? Yes, I am. And he probably shut the whole room up with that. He's standing there. If they could have slapped his hands and let him go, get him a beating and set him free. when he said that, we've been wasting our time. We should have jumped at that first. The Jews then found him guilty of blasphemy, making himself equal with God, and under the law of Moses, you were to take people that did that outside the city limits and throw rocks at them until they died, and then pile them up on top so that no one could touch the dead body and be unclean. And then they beat him up before they did anything else. Nice guys, right? Oh, that's not the end of it. Take a look at the attached list I gave you. That came from a class on Christian evidences. I'll try to go down here real quick with these. Just, you could put a check mark to the rule that they followed and an X to the one they didn't. And I guarantee you, all but one are going to be X's. Their own rules they couldn't keep in order to get Jesus convicted. So it was a true kangaroo court. Formal charges were to be announced for the reason for arrest, not in the garden. Jesus didn't even let him do it. All criminal cases must be tried and completed during the daytime so that witnesses could be rounded up and that other people could come in and speak in their defense. No, they did it before anybody who could support him even woke up in the morning. Criminal cases could not be transacted during a festival season, and this is the Passover. Capital cases involving death penalties were to be tried publicly, and they were in Caiaphas' house. No decision of the Sanhedrin was valid unless it met in its own meeting place, the Hall of Hewn Stone in the temple area. Again, they're probably on Caiaphas' back porch. Evidence in favor of the accused was presented first, then evidence against, and there was no evidence in favor. The accused was permitted to speak in his own defense. Circle that one. That's the only one they allowed him, and he refused it. All evidence had to be guaranteed by 2 or 3 witnesses, and those witnesses were to be separately and privately questioned first, before the trial. Their stories had to match exactly. That didn't happen. False testimony brought the same sentence that was given the accused. Don't you wish they'd do that today? People will make accusations and then find out later, no, I lied. Okay. You get the punishment they did. That shouldn't be how it was. That's how the Jews set this up. That was actually a Roman concept. A member of the court might speak against a prisoner and then change his mind and speak for him, but not the other way around. That didn't happen. Also, it was forbidden to ask questions which forced the accused to incriminate himself, and that is what Annas did when he finally lost his temper. Maimonides, they had a series of hospitals in New York named after this guy in the Jewish communities. Our true law does not inflict the penalty of death upon a sinner by his own confession. Only if the verdict was not guilty could a case be concluded on the same day it began. Otherwise, they wanted feelings of sympathy to come forward and people then to admit. Each individual of the Sanhedrin must give their verdict separately, and they would do it with a little cup passed under the table where they couldn't see it. And they had a white marble and a black one. White was not guilty. They put it in there. Black, that's where the black ball comes from, is guilty. And then they would pour them out on the table and count them. So you didn't know who put in what or who said what. They didn't even do that. Annas says, you heard the blasphemy. What do you think? Guilty, crucify. That was it. And they beat him up. Just probably because they wanted to wipe that smirk off his face. All right, for acquittal. Oh wait, and then it was supposed to start with the youngest, go on to the oldest. For acquittal, a majority of 1 was all that was necessary. And for condemnation, must be a majority of at least 2. They didn't even take account. Final sentence was to be pronounced by the high priest. That did happen, but only after he had broken the rules. Judgment was not to be carried out immediately, but what they did is they took him from there and dragged him maybe from his hair over to the Romans, and you'll see why in a minute. No prolonged death might be inflicted on a Jew, such as crucifixion, but what do they call for? They were coached to call for crucifixion. This was a selected group, not the riffraff from town. These people were specially chosen for their loyalty to the high priest. He who was condemned to die was not to be beaten or scourged beforehand. What happened? Even before he got to the Romans, he beat him up. Beat him to a pulp, so much so that Pilate, he knew something was up. During this time, Peter denied knowing Jesus 3 times, just as Jesus predicted. And Judas returned the blood money and then killed himself. A very gruesome picture painted by Luke in Acts chapter 1. Since it was a festival season, if you touch a dead body, you're unclean, you can't celebrate. Judas hung himself just after the Passover meal was done. He hung there. He must have hung there for a week. And Luke says his body bloated to the point where his intestines spilled out. Now the ground is unclean. So they used the money he threw back to buy that, and they buried foreigners there who had died in the city. That's how they tried to cover all this stuff up. Now started the Roman trials. And John gives a good description of those in chapter 18. Because the Jews could not execute anyone without Roman permission. Do you see a problem that the Jews had to overcome? They had to find Jesus guilty of a crime that the Romans would consider was a death penalty. Blasphemy? They would have laughed him out of the place. And Pilate did try to do that. However, things happened at the perfect time in history. I think I brought this up in one lesson before. The governor on the throne at the time in Jerusalem was the perfect one to have in place to get this thing to happen. Pilate was in big trouble with Caesar. He had messed up so many times. He allowed riots. Probably that's where Barabbas and his rabble came from. He also tried to squelch other ones and kind of overdid it. So he was in trouble. And he was ripe for a bribe. He was standing on a knife's edge between staying in your job or being scandalously punished by the Romans. He was the perfect one that the Jews could use. They did everything to avoid the real issue of deity, because the Romans would not have seen that. So they had to find something there. But Pilate, he knew he was being played. And he knew he was helpless to do anything about it. The early hour, they probably woke him up and got him out of bed. We got a rabble outside. We don't know what to do, and they're calling for you. It was also during the festival season. He thought he had a day off. And he noticed when he got there, he asked him, he said, well, looks like you've already decided. Jesus must have been really beaten. His wife then sent him a note about a dream, and the Romans were real suspicious about dreams being messages from gods. They had accusations of him claiming to be king and causing an insurrection. This guy who's beat to a pulp, well, he's not much help to you now. He's not much of a threat. And when they called for crucifixion, Pilate did everything he could to pass the buck. Here were his attempts. First of all, since Jesus was from Galilee, that's King Herod's region. He sent him over to King Herod. I don't know. I like the movie that came out of Jesus Christ Superstar. It was an opera. It was based on 60s lingo and stuff. King Herod's song is just so amusing to me. It's just so funny. See it if you have a chance. It's on YouTube. It's also it was play on Broadway. But all Herod wanted was to see a miracle. And Jesus refused. He said, get out of here. Send him back to Pilate. Pilate, oh no. So he took Jesus inside, gave him to some big husky guys who did another beating for him, and brought him out. Okay, behold the man. Take a look. Is that enough for you? Can I let him go? No, crucify him. Why? What's he done? But they wouldn't shut up. Yeah, he was trying to win sympathy from the crowd, I think. So there was a tradition at the Passover season. And evidently Pilate didn't remind them this year of releasing a political prisoner. So Pilate got smart. I'll give you a choice. The terrorist, Barabbas, or Jesus, whom you call Christ. Give us Barabbas! He pulled Jesus aside and said, who are you? What have you done? Because terrorists, even in that part of the country still today, you see it in the news now. The people appreciate their cause, but they get caught up in the response, don't they? So they don't like the terrorists. And that's who they asked for. He was hoping they would choose Jesus. Then he said, you know what? Forget it. He knew Jesus was innocent. And after talking with him aside, he was going to let Jesus go. That's when they blackmailed him. You let him go, we're telling Caesar. He couldn't afford that. So they said, but he said, you want me to kill your king? And this is what finally broke it for Pilate. We have no king but Caesar. That's it. Pilate, more than anybody, knew they had not a thin ribbon of favor for King Caesar or King Herod, or even for him. So he got out of it the only way he knew how. He had a bowl of water brought. He washed his hands in a symbolic gesture. He said, he's your responsibility. What hurts me and breaks my heart is they pronounce their own curse. Let his blood be on us and on our children, on our children's children. And you look back through history, all the millennia, I don't know of a more persecuted people. I don't know that Jesus went ahead or God went ahead and gave them their wish. It's sad to think about. But they did everything they could to get him convicted. They even broke their own rules to get it done. Next week is the saddest part of all this. Yet Jesus, again, orchestrated the whole thing. He did it and made sure they did not back out, because all Satan had to do was get him to not fulfill one prophecy, and everything was lost. So I think in the trials, he tried to get some sympathy. Didn't work. I think even with Pilate, he tried to get him released. Didn't work. Now, next week, I did save my memory sticks. My computer was damaged and broken. I haven't tried to fire it up, but I'm afraid to now. But I do have these outlines saved to that memory stick, and it's in rice right now, they say that. And it was still plugged in, so I don't think any moisture got to it, but we'll see. I'll try to have an outline for you next week. It would be the scourging, which some people died from. And remember, he's already been beaten twice. And yet still had the strength to carry that telephone pole type cross through the street. Jesus was not a wimpy, seepish little guy that they portray him on TV. He was a big, burly dude to go through all that and still have the strength to make it some of the way. And then the crucifixion itself. and the burial. That will save, because next week we have a guest teacher, I believe. If not, let me know. I got this week off. Instead of being off first week of April, I went over to my boss right from the high school across the street. And he said, whatever you need. He was a good guy. So I'm off this next week. And again, anybody who wants to help is more than welcome. In any way you want. So we'll carry on then in 2 weeks.